Good evening, everyone. How you doing tonight? Steve Stockton here with you. Let me know if you can hear me in the chat. Just want to do a little mic check here just to make sure before we get started. People continuing to come in. Notice. Whoops, there we are. Hear myself. I didn't turn my volume down. Annie Van Slyke, how you doing tonight? Good to see you here. Thanks for coming, Chris. Good to see you. Saw you last couple of nights over on Spaced Out Radio. And if they can hear me good, I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes here. Let some more people come in. Start just a little bit late. But again, appreciate everybody that's here. Lisa Ray, Chris Jarvis, Annie Van Slyke, my mods, best mods in the business. Petite Aubergine, my daughter. Glad to have you in the audience tonight. See a lot of familiar faces and then some new people. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. Tonight, guest is going to be Chris Williamson from Vanished podcast. And in the November 2020 issue of Podcast Magazine, here's what they had to say. Remember reading about Ichabod Crane, Amelia Earhart, and the Bermuda Triangle in school? Did you ever learn about D.B. Cooper, John Wilkes Booth, or even Al Capone's lost fortune? If so, has it ever seemed strange to you that we chalk up some mysteries to just that, mysteries? Well, that doesn't fly with Chris Williamson nor Jennifer Taylor. Chris has made a life out of researching mysteries. In fact, his love of mysteries, history, and research started in 3rd grade when he chose Amelia Earhart for a project topic. Now he's out to find the truth, digging far and wide to uncover the evidence wherever it points. His partner, Jennifer Taylor, is a real-life accomplished criminal defense attorney with a love for the power of podcasts. Jennifer believes that preparation, attention to detail, and work ethic are the keys to winning a case. Together, they've created a chamber where they bring forth evidence and use the rule of law to determine whether the evidence is real. They implement a modern-day investigative technique that brings each season into a courtroom and before our listening jury. The question they pose in each episode is, what evidence convinces you? In Vanished, you can expect to ride along on a live investigation of the world's most notorious mysteries and then sit in the jury box to decide if what you've heard is real, false, or legend. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and play a little clip here from Season 1.
No,
Appearance of Amelia Earhart, one of America's biggest mysteries, may finally be solved.
Amelia Earhart's disappearance has been unsolved for 80 years.
Earhart disappeared in July of 1937, and ever since, theory after theory of her fate has intrigued generations.
Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts.
The story of a brave woman of the air enters a shroud of mystery.
I think that she was the embodiment of the American spirit, the sense of adventure.
She's made a safe landing someplace.
She called for help for nearly a week before her plane was swept out to sea.
We believe that the United States government knew Amelia Earhart was in the Marshalls and was in Japanese custody.
And I went over and I met this couple and I looked this lady straight in the face and I knew who it was as soon as I looked at her. Amelia Earhart. I would know her anywhere in the world.
I am not a mystery woman. I am not Amelia Earhart.
It's much easier to fly the Atlantic Ocean now than it was a few years ago. I expect to be able to do it in my lifetime again.
For many, it was difficult to accept that so courageous a woman could be gone so suddenly.
And if the flight is successful, I hope it will increase women's interest in flying.
The airplane sitting there today, right now, this moment.
We want you to do a job for us, a big job.
We believe the Navy missed Earhart in the search in 1937, perhaps by only a few miles.
She became expendable, and Fred Noonan became expendable.
I think she liked that feeling of fear.
I only know one truth. It's time for this story to end.
Vanished.
Amelia Earhart. First episode coming on January 5th, 2019, on all major podcast platforms.
All right, folks, how about a big campfire welcome for our guest, Chris Williamson. Chris, come on in.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. This is an honor.
I'm glad to have you here tonight. That's amazing little piece of footage there, and that's just a part of season 1, from what I understand. But before we get into all that, introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us who you are, what you're about, and how you got into all this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been, doing the podcast thing for about 4 years now. And before that, I had been in a documentary film shooting sort of phase for the Chasing Earhart project, what would later become Chasing Earhart, the documentary that we're working on in post-production right now. And prior to that, I had been in approximately 9 years or so of pre-research for that project. So I've been involved in the Earhart investigation and in the Earhart case for a little over 17 years now. And I've sort of been attached to Earhart ever since I was a kid. And this has kind of led me to, podcasting, to documentary filmmaking, and then subsequently led me to investigate other cases that I've been fascinated with since I was a kid as well, like Jack the Ripper, like John Wilkes Booth, D.B. Cooper, Henry Avery, and the list goes on and on and on. So I've been doing this for a while now, and just kind of, neck deep in the Earhart game and in the podcasting game for quite some time now. So it's been a wild ride.
Wow. But it sounds like something that you have a true passion for, something that you not only enjoy, but you absolutely love doing it, and you're probably obsessed with it even.
Yeah, I think obsessed is probably a good word. I think
in a good way.
Yeah, I think anybody who gets into things like this, there's a certain level of obsession that comes along with it. Absolutely.
Now, let's go ahead and start with the first season. And what did you cover during the first season of the podcast?
Yeah, so, it's really the first time I'd seen that trailer since we put it out. It feels like forever ago now. But the first season of the show was really designed to be a narrative of my investigation into the Amelia Earhart case. I had been doing Chasing Earhart for quite some time at that point, and I wanted to do something a little more theatrical in nature with the show. And I had been doing the Chasing Earhart podcast for quite some time, and we had been doing long form interviews there. And I just wanted to change up the format a little bit and do something a little more entertaining for the listening audience. And so we started Vanished, and it was really just sort of this raw, gritty sort of version of the show where I would sort of call on everybody that I had talked to in the Chasing Earhart podcast and in that project over the course of the last several years. And, to my amazement, it just sort of turned into this thing where after the first episode dropped, people sort of really responded to it. And once they started responding to it and wanting more, we decided to go for sort of a whole season and turning it into this entire thing that we did for season 1, what ended up being season 1. And we took Earhart from the cradle to the disappearance and everything beyond that, everything that's taken place over the last 80 plus years and all the multiple theories that have been going on in the investigation and where those theories take us. And we just sort of turned the page, mid season. I had this idea to do this trial by jury format that you mentioned earlier. And once we started doing that just really took off, and we just started doing season 1, and now we had season 1 in the can, and we have just started season 2 with a whole new caseload. And now that we've covered Earhart about as thoroughly as you possibly can cover Earhart, we decided to move on to other cases that either myself or my partner Jennifer were particularly fond of and wanted to cover.
Wow, that's great. Sorry if anybody heard Melder there in the background. He gets excited sometimes when we go live on the air.
Great name.
Yeah,
dog, by the way.
So he likes to make his presence known there. So I'll put him on the screen there. So maybe that'll make him behave or not. Anyway, I think I got everything muted before it actually went out, but anyway, so yeah, it's fascinating the way that you delve into this, and being that these are historical cases, and like you mentioned, some of them 80 years or more, like in the case of John Wilkes Booth, which I'm jumping ahead here.
Yeah, sure.
Like 150 years.
Yeah.
But there's so much stuff out there. There's so many different theories. There's so much evidence. And I like the way that you present it there. And you're not saying this is necessarily this way or that way, but here's what we found. Decide for yourselves. And that's a great way to do anything, I think. And if it, in a way, I think it makes more questions than answers, but that's a good thing because those questions can lead to dialogues and then discovery through those dialogues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, curiosity breeds progression. And, these cases that we're discussing and that we're covering are for all intents and purposes, cold cases. Now, for the people that are investigating various aspects of, whether it's the Earhart case or, the idea that John Wilkes Booth might have survived the shooting or the fire at Garrett's Barn, the idea that Jack the Ripper never got caught and maybe he did die, maybe he did get executed, maybe he did die in a prison. The list goes on. And I feel like because there's no concrete evidence to support any definitive conclusion to a lot of these cases, it just, what we do is sort of breeds curiosity, breeds progression in the cases. And we've been super honored to sort of be the spark that lights the fire for certain people, for even a new generation that maybe weren't too familiar with who Amelia Earhart was beyond a woman aviator, or weren't too familiar with the D.B. Cooper case other than just the pop culture references. So that's kind of one of the jobs that we have. And obviously we want to do that in a way that makes a lot of sense. We want to do that in a way that entices people to sort of tune into the show and participate. Like you said, if you're sitting in a jury and you're hearing testimony, witnesses, evidence, experts in these cases, what's going to convince you? What's going to make you believe, hey, this is what happened? And that's really just the premise of the show in a nutshell. Is we try to make this as realistic as we can. We try to apply as much rule of law as we can. I mean, we're dealing with cases that you said are in some cases hundreds of years old. So, rule of law doesn't apply in a lot of cases, but we try to do certain rules of law. We try to make it as applicable as we can and make it as entertaining as we can at the same time for the audience. So it's been a lot of fun and it's been challenging, but we hope that it breeds the curiosity that we're hoping for in this whole thing. Is just like, get out there, do your own research, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to crack one of these cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the quote there in the trailer where the gentleman said, you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts.
Absolutely.
And I used to work in a law firm, and it just amazed me. It was a medical malpractice, products liability, and personal injury firm. And no matter what position you had, you could find a medical expert. I mean, board certified, everything that would agree with both sides. Each side would have their own experts. And I thought, well, that's, something's not right there when you can have two experts with that big of a difference of opinion. But that's just the way it is. And it's the way a lot of the stuff is in these cases too. There's no right or wrong. It's just some seems more right than others. But then I've had my opinion changed before when you listen to evidence, particularly stuff that's really compelling or that you didn't know before.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of, are there things like that you discovered that you weren't aware of, just like something that totally blew your mind on any of these cases?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we find stuff all the time that's interesting. It goes from a scale of just, oh, that's interesting, to, you're sort of like, you have to sit down for a minute and you have to think, wow, this is pretty amazing. And we've certainly had our share of that. As I said, I've been investigating Earhart for many years, and just listening to some of the people talk about certain aspects of the case, certain aspects of their theories, and then sort of coming across certain evidence potentially that we've kind of dug up over our relationships with a lot of the people that are in the Earhart community that are sort of passing the torch and moving on, or people that are no longer with us. We're able to sift through some of their research, their data, and sort of complete some of the strings. And sometimes we find something new, that's really interesting. I found a Howard Hughes letter in a bunch of papers that belonged to a woman by the name of Lou Foudere. who was the curator for the Amelia Earhart Birthplace Museum for 30 or 40 years, a very long time. She's an icon in the Earhart community, and everybody who knows her really loves her. And she's, had all this paperwork that she probably had forgotten about over the years. And, I found this letter from Howard Hughes that I just blew my mind, that potentially brings him into the Amelia Earhart, investigation and into the Amelia Earhart potential repatriation, which is just a mind-blowing thing. So you find something like that, and, like I said, you have to sit down for a minute to sort of think about it. You have to sort of figure out how this all fits into the overall puzzle. And then, you just find things that are really interesting, little tidbits here and there. You learn stories, especially about Earhart and about, just different parts of different cases that just kind of like, they're a little bit of a head scratcher. And it's really interesting, adds to the legacy, adds to, in good or bad when I say legacy, because some of these people are not very good people. But yeah, it's something it's something we get a kick out of. We find stuff like that all the time, and it's just really amazing.
Yeah, that would really be amazing. The fun part to me is finding something in the research that maybe something that's not as well known or lesser known, and just like, wow, this could change things. And the Earhart case, I heard about that as a kid. My dad was real familiar with it. He'd kind of followed that one. And, every now and then, seems like every year or so around the anniversary of the disappearance, you would hear something about it on TV, and maybe a little bit of new news that they think they'd found part of the plane, or I think one time they found part of a shoe they thought was hers, and just little bits of things that continually surface like that. And then, of course, the theory that she was spying for the United States, and she was captured by the Japanese, and there's just so many different ways you can go with that, and without actually knowing, I think again the thrill is in the chase. That's what makes it so interesting, because you can, as Charles Fort said, you can measure a circle beginning anywhere, and that's kind of the way it is with this, that you can connect the dots so many different ways. And there really is no right or wrong answer until it's been absolutely proven beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, it's all inclusive, right? So it's one of those situations where we don't have any concrete answers, so everything's on the table. That's sort of the inductive reasoning approach is kind of what I take to all these cases. Look, I want to hear everything. I want to know everything about these cases. I want to know every theory. I want to know why these people that are working this theory were convinced of this particular theory. What was it? Because everybody's got a certain thing, a certain aspect, one thing that convinces them. And I want to know what that was, and I want to put that to the test. And, with the Earhart case in particular, every one of these theories, there's multiple theories. We covered 5, and we could have gone longer. But when you look at all these different theories, there's different types of evidence to sort of support that theory. There's DNA evidence potentially. There's the Jalluit dock photo. There's eyewitness testimony. There's a mountain of circumstantial evidence. There's the official story backed by the U.S. government. Take that as you will. There's all kinds of different aspects that sort of stand up against each other, and it's really the listener's job to sort of say, okay, well, hey, if over 200 witnesses saw her in the Marshall Islands and Saipan, either her, Noonan, or the Electra itself, then that's pretty convincing. 1 or 2 people, okay, I'll give you that. But if over 200 people see her, something's not right there. Or if you look at what Tiger did on Nicomoro Island, and the idea that she might have been a castaway, and all the circumstantial evidence that they put together a really solid case. Building these cases is like building a house. You need bricks to build these houses, and they're building their case brick by brick, and they've done that for over 40 years. Does that convince you? Does that push you over the edge? So there's just all kinds of different factors that you have to look at, and it's our job to sort of present the evidence as unbiased as humanly possible, and then get out of the way and let our listeners say, okay, this is what makes the most sense to me. Because most of these theories you're going to hear on the show, if you listen to season 1, some of these episodes went 4.5 hours long, and we went really deep and had all these experts and witnesses to kind of support these theories. You have to sit there in the jury box, and you have to say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And you're gonna hear different things from all over the globe here on all these different theories, and it's really just a lot of fun for us to present it and just stand back and let people say, hey, I like this. This makes sense. Or, you know what, this doesn't make sense, and here's why. And that's kind of the beauty. One of the things that we do that we really love is just, we kind of get to to play that neutrality, and I think we do it pretty well.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the thing. It's about engaging people and getting a dialogue and a discussion going, because that's, like you said, that's how you progress. That's how you move forward, or at least how you look at it from so many different angles. And something else that's always amazed me are like the little almost cults that spring up around some of these cases, the ologies, like you've got the Ripperology, you've got Taylorology, like for the William Desmond Taylor murder in Hollywood that involved Mary Miles Minter and all that. And there are people that will just focus on this one particular case their entire lives. They write books about it, they collect data and circumstantial evidence, interviews, and it's amazing. And I'd love that type of obsession, that level of being so focused on something that it's hard to consider anything else even.
Yeah. Everybody wants to be right, and I think it's human nature that these cases bother us as people. We don't like to have a sentence with no period on the end. And I think you take someone like Earhart, who, when she vanished off the face of the earth, was arguably the most famous woman on the planet, maybe even the most famous person on the planet, and you add that to the mix. It's pretty remarkable. You look at someone like D.B. Cooper, who just, the D.B. Cooper thing, man, it's the mind reels, because here's if you look at something like Earhart and you look at Cooper, two major massive aviation cases. I mean, the Lockheed Electra, Earhart's Lockheed Electra, would be the holy grail. Make no mistake about it. If that thing was found tomorrow, regardless of where it was found or how it was found, that would be the holy grail of aviation. But let's say the rest of the Cooper money turned up next week, and that was found, and we were able to positively ID who Cooper was. That would be a pretty amazing thing. But when you look at those two, people look at the Cooper case a very different way than they look at the Earhart case. They're very different people. Obviously, one was very much so in the public eye. One existed on this planet that we know of for about 5 or 6 hours and then just vanished into the night. So Cooper has no backstory, and he has no ending. He exists on a plane for about 5 or 6 hours, and that's it. So you look at something like that, and it blows your mind. And you look at all this, next year is the 50th anniversary of the Cooper hijacking, of the Norjack hijacking, and it's amazing. And people still don't have much more information than they do, than they did the day after he jumped out of that plane. So you're looking at all this stuff, and people are, attaching themselves to a theory, a suspect, whatever the case is, and they're working as hard as they possibly can to prove that one theory or that one suspect or whatever the case is. And it's fascinating in and of itself that people would stick to something that hard, that long. And I admire it greatly, and that's why we request to have these people on the show, and why we want to have them talk about it rather than just sitting around listening to us ramble on about it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm in the Pacific Northwest. D.B. Cooper is still a big deal out here all the time. There's a cult of personality around him. He's a folk hero to a lot of people. He's the guy that did it and got away with it, And they have D.B. Cooper days out here in, well, not in Portland, where I'm at, Portland, Oregon, but over across the river in Washington State.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, because Portland was involved in all that too. But again, I remember when that happened, I was just a kid, but I remember hearing about it and just thinking, wow, that's pretty gutsy, and he got away with it and kept watching the news and waiting for, him to get caught, and he never did. And they found some of the money, which part of that was auctioned off on eBay, and I would love to have owned a piece of that, but it went really expensive from what I remember. About it. But other than that one little bit that they found, that's it. I still like to think that he did get away, and there's just something about that mystique, that romanticism of taking money and a parachute and jumping out into the night and nobody ever finding you again.
Yeah, Cooper is a fascinating one indeed, and I think it's likely the case will end season 2 on. It's very robust, and anybody who's in the Cooper vortex, shout out to my friend Darren, who runs that podcast. We just did a very lengthy conversation a couple of weeks ago. He's one of the nicest guys in the business and a kindred spirit of mine. But anybody who's in that Cooper vortex, who gets sort of sucked into that and has been studying it for so long, it's amazing how much data has been birthed out of approximately 5 or 6 hours of this guy's existence. Obviously he had a life before and maybe a life after, depending on what you believe. But the Cooper case in and of itself is pretty fascinating out of that little amount of time that he existed on that plane. So it doesn't cease to amaze me ever what we do and what we cover, and I try to purposely stay sort of naive to certain aspects of certain cases, because I want the audience to sort of listen to my reaction, because sometimes it's visceral. I mean, we're dealing with some of the most evil people on the planet, in certain cases. You take someone like Jack the Ripper that we're doing right now, and it's this guy, if Earhart was America's sweetheart and one of the most beloved figures in history, Ripper certainly is probably at the very bottom of that pack as far as probably the most evil people. And I had never, it's a case that Jennifer brought to my attention. I mean, obviously I'd known about it, but I really didn't realize how brutally, just the pure brutality and graphicness of the murders that he committed on the what people believe is the canonical 5, perhaps more women than just those 5. Mm-hmm. But you look at someone like that and you just think, this guy was never caught. Some people have certain suspects and they feel, hey, this was the guy, and he died he got executed, and he actually did get, he did die, but we don't know. Just like we don't know what happened to Earhart, we don't know what happened to Jack the Ripper other than speculation and theory.
Yeah,
and
so many different theories. I've even heard that he immigrated to the U.S. possibly because there were murders somewhere in New England, might have been New York, I think, or New Jersey, that were very similar not too long after the Ripper murders. And again, it's one of those things. And then there's the whole Masonic angle. I've heard that one of the victims, anyway, the way she was displayed had Masonic overtones to it, and just it's another one of those, like you said, that you can go as deep as you want to and never find the bottom of that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Agreed, 100%. And I'm looking at some of the chat, and Stephen Davis just put in the chat, Jack was the devil. I absolutely 100% agree. That was pure evil what he did, and I feel like here's a guy who just, look, folks, we did the rundown, and, Jen was sort of walking me through the case and the canonical 5. We were kind of going back and forth on that. And I first saw the autopsy photos of Mary Jane Kelly and some of the other women that were killed. And it's stomach churning. I had never seen it. And I couldn't imagine, dying that way. And I couldn't imagine what these women felt in their last moments. And I feel like, when you look at Jack the Ripper, I just talked about this in some of the narration for part 3 of Ripper that we just put out. There's people that have full body Jack the Ripper body Jack the Ripper tattoos. There's Jack the Ripper walking tours in London. There's movies, there's film, film and TV and comic books and pop culture and all this stuff. And I just feel like, it's like two sides. There's all this pop culture fascination with someone like that, and then at the other end, there's, hey, this man murdered brutally in the most brutal fashion possible, murdered 5 women, maybe more. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing, sort of how these cases work, and how there's almost two sides of every case. There's almost a light and a dark side to each case.
Absolutely.
And some of these cases just get worse.
And then a lot of people turn them into folk heroes or romanticize them, like Charles Manson and that whole case. There are people right now that are huge fans of Charlie that don't consider, all the other stuff that take place, whether he did it or not. He had people do it maybe, but there's people that are just devoted to Charlie, and that whole aspect of it. You get that, again, a cult of personality that springs up around these. And then you have somebody like a Ted Bundy, who was just pure evil, but you had women showing up into court and sending him marriage proposals and things. There's something about that boogeyman that draws people in, and that is attractive to some people, and you want to see how close you can get to that, or how far you can get into it, and see how close you can get to the flame and not get burned. And there's Petite Aubergine, my daughter, says some weirdo here in Portland has an airbrush portrait of Albert Fish on the hood of their car. Again, see that in tattoos. Ed Gein is another popular one. Spawned a lot of films, and Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that and the other. but he was, a cannibal and a ghoul, a grave robber and a murderer. So,
yeah, just incredibly, you start looking at certain cases like this, and you look at, people like Jack the Ripper. I feel like maybe Ripper's as bad as it gets, personally. Now, granted, I'm not exposed to a lot of true crime. I'm a fan of true crime podcasts. I have some friends that do some fantastic, true crime shows that do a really good service to, to the victims and their families. And that's really what it should be all about. And that's what we try to do with Vanished and with Ripper particularly is, there's these women at the center of this case, and it really should be about the legacy of those women and what they endured, and not really this figure that we don't really know much about, unfortunately. I mean, I wish we had for the sake of those women and their families and their extended families, and I wish we had an answer to who Ripper was. And I think, it's one of those scenarios where this guy did some obviously very horrific things. And, you look at Cooper, someone like D.B. Cooper, and as you mentioned, some people think he's a folk hero, and some people still believe that. And there's D.B. Cooper celebrations, and there's D.B. Cooper lookalike contests, and all these different things. And again, that's sort of the pop culture reference side of things. But then here's a guy who essentially you think there's no victims in that case, but there's victims in that case. This guy hijacked this plane and held these people that were pretty terrified and that were affected forever for the rest of their lives on this one case and on this one night, in particular. And so this is the guy that caused that, and he jumps out of the plane, whether you believe he hits the ground and survives and vanishes into the night, or whether you believe he dies on impact and they just never find his body. There's a lot of different people that believe that Cooper was a really bad guy, and that he just, had a grudge, and he, maybe in the way it was done, there's a little bit of romanticizing with it, as you mentioned, but at the end of the day, this is a crime this guy committed, right. And it's unsolved still, and that's the mind-blowing thing.
Endangered those people's life for financial gain. That could have caused all kinds of bad things to happen, and that didn't seem to have any care or concern for him. So but again, that's one of those things. Like I know you've got John Wilkes Booth coming up. That's this season too, correct?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Booth. That might be next. We're sort of going back and forth with that. Interestingly enough, regarding Booth, originally we were going to do season 2 in its entirety dedicated to Booth, because, again, it's a case I've been fascinated with since I was a kid, and I didn't know much about it other than sort of, again, the references and things of that nature. But I didn't realize how deep this case goes and how far of a reach it has until I was introduced to certain people that were involved in investigating the idea that Booth maybe did not die that night at Garrett's barn, that someone else in fact died in his place. And so, you hear that and you think, what? No, that can't be right. That's really kind of ridiculous on the premise and just sort of on the surface. And it will seem like that at first. And then when you start looking at some of the medical reports that come out for the people that were actually involved in the case and kind of been working this thing, when you start talking to people like Nate Orlowick, who's been studying this case for 40 years and knows more about Booth and knows more about this case than anybody alive, essentially. And you see those people and they're convinced, they know that Booth did not die that night. You kind of have to pay attention to that, and at least to a certain extent. And you have to see where that takes you. And that's kind of what we do. We just sort of, we take on these cases and we go with this process and just kind of let it ride. And Booth was going to be initially a full season because it warrants that. And, we cut a trailer for Booth. We put it out, had some teaser, posters out for Booth and all that good stuff. And then, we had to sort of call an audible at the last minute and sort of put Booth off a little bit. And we decided to start with Ripper instead. And it looks like we're going to probably be doing Booth second, and then we'll kind of see what order they go in. But Henry Avery is another one we're doing this season, and that's one that a lot of people don't really know about. When you hear,
I'm not familiar with that one. Could you give us a little info on that one?
Yeah, so very little is known actually about Avery's life, sort of before his pirate career. This goes way back to the days of piracy, and we presume that he was born somewhere around 1653 near Plymouth, England. And Avery starts his sea career on unlicensed slave ships. And in 1694, about there somewhere, he was first made on Charles II's 46-gun Spanish ship that had a license to attack French smugglers. And while in that role on that ship, he organizes a mutiny and subsequently gets elected as the new captain. And he renames the ship from Charles to Fancy, and they head off toward, the Cape of Good Hope. And, Avery ends up building this career in a very short time. He's one of the most feared pirates of all. And, famous pirate captains like Thomas Tew and William Want and Thomas Wake and William May, they're all sailing under his leadership at one point. And Avery had these 5 ships. It was basically a mini fleet that was powerful enough to attack even the most well-known, well-armored, treasure-carrying ships that were sailing between India and the Middle East. And, he's not known as well as like Blackbeard and Bartholomew Roberts and a lot of those other ones, but a lot of people believe that he inspired them. He was, again, it's like Ripper inspiring, modern-day serial killers in a way. It was very brief. His career was only a couple of years on the sea. And of all of his conquests that he kind of had under his belt, he's probably best known for something called the Ganges Sawi attack. And this is when he and his crew, they made off with what would be somewhere in the neighborhood of approximately $400 million, maybe. Wow. As a result of a really brutal attack and takeover. And that ship belonged to the British East India Company of ships, and the British East India Company, for people who know or don't know, was the biggest organization of ships in the world. So hitting this particular ship was sort of like the holy grail for Avery. And after the attack, Avery and his crew, they flee to the Bahamas, and Bahamas was at the time, it was like considered a pirate's cove and a safe haven. And of course, English authorities are pissed because they stole all their money and hit one of their most important ships. So they naturally place a bounty on his head, but no one ever gets a chance to collect it because he gets this last big score. And, before they come for him and his pirates scatter. After only a very short stay in the Caribbean. And, a few of them were rounded up and a few of them were executed, but the vast majority of his crew escaped to Europe and American colonies. And we don't know what happened to Henry Avery. There's speculation that he, sailed to Ireland under a pseudonym, but the trail sort of goes cold from there. And most of, his contemporaries and most of the people that are studying the case now believe that he made a clean getaway and he retired with the treasure almost intact. So some people believe that treasure, if it was found today, would be worth somewhere between $500 million and maybe even north of $1 billion, depending on who you believe. So this guy, it was the most famous, one of the most famous loots in all of history, and we still don't know where it is, and we still don't know who he was really and where he left to and what became of him. So, there's people that speculate that he died penniless. I mean, again, it's all speculation, but I sure would love to find that treasure. I sure would love to find
absolutely. Just a little bit of it, even
just a little bit of it. Talking about the Cooper money being worth, its weight in gold. I mean, if you found that would be, again, another holy grail. I mean, there's a few of them that are out there, but I think that would really be a pretty remarkable find if you found even a piece of that treasure. So, Henry Avery is a fascinating character and case, and he was brutal in his own right, but he was a case that not a lot of people know about. So we're gonna cover that, and we're gonna bring Henry Avery potentially to trial in a modern day jury, which is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be very difficult, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, looking forward to that one. Now, in the chat here, Annie Van Slyke brought up something interesting. She was talking about Jeffrey Dahmer and how people made jokes about him, and he did do some really sick things. But then when you see him interviewed, he's very unassuming, very polite, and respectful person. But a lot of people deal with things in a humorous way. I know, like with the Ed Gein case, that was one when his crimes came to light that Ed Gein jokes were in vogue. And the same one, the oldest I've ever heard, is about the Lincoln assassination, that a reporter allegedly asked Mary Todd Lincoln, other than that, Ms. Lincoln, did you enjoy the play? So
yeah.
But I think people do deal with it in a humor. Try to see the humor in things, or to make light of it, just because it's so horrible and because it's so evil and such.
Yeah.
That's one way it's dealt with. But again, all of them. I want to see all of them. I'm working my way through the Ripper now, and it's the episode where you're discussing the medical reports, and I was just, oh man, it's so brutal. And you just, again, I've read a lot about the Ripper case, several different books, and I've watched documentaries and things, but until you really hear the details like that, and it's just so shocking. And I won't go into it here, but definitely check that out. But
yeah, definitely, it's not for the faint of heart. Ripper is
definitely
very difficult. I would stress that if you have younger. It's not, believe it or not, people like to get started on this stuff young. I can certainly understand that, but I would say, if you skew a little younger, or if you're squeamish, at least don't look at the autopsy photos. I know that's probably going to make everybody Google the autopsy photos right now.
Yep.
But I would say that, we have a fairly young-ish audience, and we always, we try to keep that in mind. But there's no way you can discuss Jack the Ripper and leave out the brutality, because you just can't work around the description. It's to really get people to understand what this man did. It's very difficult, and it's very hard to sort of like take it all in and to sort of consume it. And that's what we've been doing for, I don't know, probably the past couple of months now, 2-3 months now, is I've really just been consuming Jack the Ripper. And it's been, it's been difficult to go from Earhart to that. And, Earhart's got some pretty bad little spots in it, the case, depending on what you look into. But Ripper is just pure brutality, and it's really a very difficult case to sort of start season 2 on. It's a heavy case to start season 2 on, but we figured, we want to get it out of the way. We want to get it out on the table, and we want people to see that, at the center of this case was 5 women, and potentially more, man. I mean, this guy might have been killing for years, and he might have killed dozens and dozens of women, and there's only, the canonical 5, which is basically sort of, the 5 women that he was attributed to killing. There's women before, there's potentially women afterwards. There's rumors of him taking a break and starting up killing again. I mean, since we don't know really what happened, and we don't have that period on the end of that sentence, the sky's the limit, unfortunately, with what this guy could have done. And that's one of the questions we ask in season 2, and so far in the Ripper case, is what must the mentality be for a man that would commit murders this horrifically? What must the mental mindset be for someone like that? And talking about Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy and all these other people that were sort of birthed from this guy's evil, modern day versions of him and variations of him. But it's really brutal. It's really difficult. And if you're going to immerse yourself in something like that, you have to sort of be able to separate yourself. And I'm not the best at doing that. It's just, it's difficult. It's a difficult aspect of what we do.
Absolutely. I covered crime for magazines and local news and things back in the 90s. And it's like Nietzsche said, when you stare into the abyss stares into you. And there was times when it got so heavy and so dark that I would just have to take a few steps back, because especially some of the people that I corresponded with. I corresponded with Gacy. I corresponded with Tex Watson. He wasn't so bad. But some of those guys, and just, I'm thinking, no, this is just, you get too far into it, and I don't want to say you start thinking like they do, but you see how they think, and it just, and the same with some of the paranormal stuff, and even on here, the missing persons cases that we cover. That's another very dark place to get into sometimes, and that's why after we've done several videos about people that are missing and presumed dead and never found, then we'll do something light. We'll do, a Denver International Airport or something just still creepy, but not so dark as to affect you mentally, especially with all that's going on right now. It's already a dark place.
Yeah, 100% agreed. to steal a line from a friend of mine, the worst monsters are real, and it's very, very true. It's you see all this brutality out here, and just what people can do. I got sucked into the whole Chris Watts case and the Shanann Watts case, and I looking at that case, I can't imagine. I can't put myself in that space. I can't imagine how a father could do the things that he did to those beautiful little girls, and to his wife and to his unborn son. Like, and if you look at him, he's unassuming. Like, some of the folks are talking about in the chat, I mean, they're very unassuming, and unfortunately, and not, this is excluding Chris Watts, but you look at someone like Ted Bundy and some of these other people. I mean, unfortunately, they're pretty intelligent guys. If you look at someone like Charles Manson, I mean, he might have been batshit crazy, but I mean, you listen to him talk, and it's pretty wild. And some of these people, unfortunately, could have. You wonder what they could have done with their lives, or had they sort of pushed in a different direction and gone in a different direction. And it's just it adds to the tragedy that they decided to either give into internal desire and give into internal sickness and do what they did and become infamous instead of famous for something positive. And it's just a really difficult thing, so yeah, really hard.
And even during one of the Bundy trials, the judge that he went before told him, said, that I would have loved to have had you as a lawyer in my court, but you went the other way, buddy. And that's,
yeah.
I do want to apologize. I've got my window cracked because it gets kind of warm here in the studio. The neighbor's cat is sitting on the fence, and it wants in, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's, if you hear that, all that meowing in the background, his name is Mr. Mouse.
Yeah.
And another animal interruption here.
Yeah, he's enjoying the show.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. It's been it's been a wild ride thus far, and I think we have, we're just getting started for season 2. We've still got a couple more pieces for Jack the Ripper to put out. We're getting ready to put out actually our trial by jury piece for Jack the Ripper, where I'm going to present the person I think is responsible for the Ripper murders, and we're going to present some witnesses and experts on that, and kind of try to push why I think that person is responsible in particular. And then we're going to have a basically just a retrospective, an epilogue piece on Ripper, and then we're going to move into case number 2, whichever direction we're going to go with that. Likely will be Booth, but we'll see. We might mix it up. It just depends on kind of how everything plays out and who is able to record when, and how that works. So it's
absolutely,
getting guests together and getting their schedules aligned are very difficult sometimes. So
now, one thing I wanted to ask you about: do you ever take into account anything of a supernatural or paranormal nature when you're studying these cases, or do you go strictly hard science?
That's a great question. I'd say we skew a little more towards strictly hard science and legal. I'm certainly not opposed to that personally. I mean, I'm fascinated with certain cases. The Travis Walton case from Fire in the Sky is one of my very favorite cases of all time. Like I love that case. I was fascinated with it. I read the book. Obviously saw the film. As far as these particular cases, there are paranormal-ish aspects to certain parts of the cases. A lot of people believe that Jack the Ripper's ghost still haunts Whitechapel. They do the tours there. I've seen some stuff on YouTube. In some of the research we've done, a lot of people say that some of the women that he killed still haunt Whitechapel. One of my favorite stories, and I've talked about this with Jen, and we've considered covering it a little bit, either maybe in a bonus piece or something else. Abraham Lincoln, before he was murdered, had a premonition on his own death. He had a dream, and this dream premonition, and all these people were gathered around this casket, and in the casket was Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln himself walks up to somebody that's observing it and says, "Hey, who's in the casket?" And he says, don't you know the president was killed? And this was like a week before he died.
Yeah.
So some people believe that Lincoln's ghost still walks the halls of the White House, which is, I love stuff like that. I think it's interesting. I think it's fun. And I think it adds a different aspect. But for it just doesn't fit the MO for what we do as a show. I think, we can certainly have fun speculating and talking about it and all that good stuff. But, when we're trying to present sort of the case and the science and everything, it's difficult.
Don't want to get into the woo-woo too much. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's as much as I love to do it and it's fun, it can be difficult sometimes to sort of
mention
add that in.
The Lincoln, because that whole thing is shrouded in mystery and the paranormal.
Yeah.
The ghost still in the Lincoln bedroom there, like you said, and the parallel between the Kennedy assassination and the Lincoln assassination. I used to have a thing I got as a kid. It was I think I got it at Stuckey's. I don't know if anybody knows what a Stuckey's is, if they still even have those. But back in the day when you traveled, when the interstates were a new thing, or even some of the old state highways, every little bit, particularly going north and south on the East Coast, there would be a Stuckey's every few miles, and they had everything there. You could buy gas, and they had pecan logs, and they had little doodads and souvenirs. And I had this little card one time, postcard size, and it had a penny on there, the Lincoln had sent, and it had a little engraving of Kennedy stamped on it, facing Lincoln, and it had a list of all the different things and how they were kind of backwards. Like Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Lincoln's assassin fled to a theater, or assassinated him in a theater and fled to a warehouse. Kennedy's assassin worked from a warehouse and fled to a theater. All these little almost Fortean or synchronicity strange things there. And again, it's easy to connect the dots after the fact and find these things. But that one just in particular, and like even the funeral train that carried him to Illinois from Washington, they still see that occasionally. There's been reports of that, and it's not exactly the train that he was actually on, but very different. And supposedly there's skeletons playing music, and the engineer is a skeleton, and again, just so much weird stuff. And I don't know if it was one of those things where it was just such a blow to America that's where kind of the paranormal stuff came into it.
Yeah.
Or if there really is something around that, but
yeah, it's the paranormal aspects. I have a couple of good friends, Scott and Forrest from Astonishing Legends, and they do a really it's been a groundbreaking podcast that they do, and they cover a lot of the sort of the mysterious and paranormal, and we synced up because of the sort of the cross reference between the Earhart piece I was doing and a series they had done early in their run. And we've talked about that. We talked about, I used to live in Atchison, Kansas. I lived there for several years when we were shooting the documentary and kind of going through the meat potatoes of that project. And I visited the Sally House a couple of times there in Atchison, Kansas. And, there's like a big draw for paranormal there in that little town. And, paranormal and historical goes hand in hand. I mean, there's all kinds of, you can probably link paranormal to any historical mystery that you want in some way, shape, or form, and there's going to be some kind of a story or some kind of a link somewhere. And I think, that just adds to the mystery, adds to the intrigue, and adds to the excitement of talking about these cases. You can sort of tackle them from any position you want to, whether it's scientific based, historical, mathematical, paranormal, you name it, you can sort of tackle it from any position, which is, makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I imagine in my head what your room where you do your research looks like. Is it like one of these like you see on TV where they're investigating a crime and you have things pinned all over the wall and red ribbons running from
the red twine. Actually, funny enough, I did have that for Earhart because the Earhart case is so dense and so robust that you just you lose track really fast. And but where I just sort of remodeled my office, and we sort of made it a very, almost like a tomb in here, which is what I like. I like it to be sort of darker in here. I have sort of like, got my mood lighting going and everything. Let me be honest. When we're doing these shows and we're doing research, I mean, 90% of, and this, so I'm I don't have to really preach this to you, but 90% of what we do is you never see it. It's pre-research. So it's what you do to prepare for these shows. And, Jen and I have been talking about season 2 for, months and months, probably 6 or 8 months before we ever even sat down and recorded together for season 2. So, we were sort of structuring this whole thing, and you do all this research. And so I try to put myself in an environment that allows me to, I was always big on the library when I was a kid. So I try to put myself in a very quiet environment. I got my noise canceling headphones on, I'm writing. I like to write a lot of my notes out longhand. Of course I use a computer as well, but I like to write stuff out because I find personally that if I write it out, I can actually remember it a little bit better. So when I interview folks and I have guests on the show, I typically write notes out longhand in addition to questions that we're going to jot down and make sure that we ask them. So, my little area is, it's got some quietness to it, but we have that board. I'll actually have to send you a picture of that board that we have for Earhart.
I'd like to see that. But the same way I've got to set the mood. I have candles, I have fake skulls and things sitting around. I do a lot of horror and paranormal stuff too. And like you said, sometimes the research, I may spend 30, 40 hours on an hour-long video. I also do a podcast called Strange Things with my partner Jim and Jade, and we put out an episode today about urban legends. And I seriously, probably an easy 40 hours went into that hour episode. But I enjoy the research. I enjoy just the preparing to write. And then when I do write, and I've written books and things too, I've found that I'm at my most creative and at my most comfortable between midnight and about 4 or 5 a.m. It's quiet. There's not, I live alone anyway, but there's not any distractions, not anything going on. Melder sits under the desk asleep, and I can just get lost. And, I'm sitting here and I'm writing, and I look up to see, think maybe I've been here an hour or two, and it's daylight outside. And I'm like, wow, that went fast. But I love having that focus. Now, I was basically, as a kid, I wasn't really OCD. I was probably somewhere on the autism spectrum. Asperger's is what I'm told. They didn't really have that diagnosis at the time, but it gives you that, and high functioning, it gives you that ability to just focus in and everything just melts away. Yeah. And I like being in that zone. I can sit and do 4,000 or 5,000 words. I don't even count words anymore. I go by the hour. My work day, that my discipline that I like for myself, I write for 4 hours a day and I read for 4 hours a day, and then beyond that, other stuff too. But I think in order to be even a good writer, a passable writer, you've got to be a great reader. So that's why I read everything. I read history, biographies, sometimes fiction, anything I can get my hands on. Now, you mentioned libraries and things. What is your go-to for that? Do you use newspapers.com to dig up some of these old articles? I'm blown away with that. Heather Mosier, one of the writers for this show, she's a classics professor at Kent State University in Ohio, and she has a subscription to that through the school, and all the time I'm like, Heather, look up this for me. Can you tell me what happened on this date, or what can you find about Bigfoot sightings in the 1800s? And it's amazing some of the stuff that they have on there that you can dig up in those old papers.
Yeah, you have to get into a certain mood, and I think as you mentioned, the the environment that you're in really does help. So I always tell people that are going to start doing what we do and and all that good stuff, get yourself in that mood. Whatever you got to do, get yourself there. And I think for me personally, I love the National Archives. We had the Archivist of the United States on the show for Chasing Earhart, and he talked about sort of citizen archiving and everything that goes into that. And I'm a big fan of getting out there, physically going to libraries, actually looking at microfilms if you can, looking at old newspapers. Looking at stuff like that. We did a lot of that for Earhart. Every time we were shooting on location, we shot at the LA Public Library and a couple other spots. We would spend a few hours before the shoot and sometimes several hours after the shoot just going through resources. And I think that really helps you sort of get in that mindset. I love just sitting on the floor with a bunch of old papers and a bunch of old documents and just kind of going through what some people might have dismissed prior to me going through it, and just kind of making my own conclusions about those documents and trying to find little things contained within those documents that was never found. That's how I found the Howard Hughes piece. I just kind of found it by accident. It wasn't some big discovery that was, leading. It just kind of happened really quickly by accident. And once I kind of figured out what it was pretty shocking. So, I like to get my hands dirty. I like to actually get into archives if I can. I like to get into libraries. I like to physically feel my hand on a book. I still highlight, typically when I read a book, I will read it twice most of the time. Once I'll just read it for consumption, just so I can consume it without any notes or anything like that, get the overall story. And then the second time I'll go through it and make my cliff notes, and I'll actually highlight and do things of that nature. Sometimes I'll find certain pages on Goodreads or something like that I really want to print out and highlight or blow up or something like that. Kind of stuff to me is a big deal. I'm not really pure digital. I like to try to mix it up as much as I can. As much as we're able to right now, and sort of with what's going on. But that's kind of put a damper on going into different public places and things of that nature right now. But that's certainly what I did before, and that's certainly what I continue to do now. If there's a book, I'll buy it, man. I mean, I'll buy it. I'll read it. I won't do the Kindle thing. It's just not my style. I'd rather read it and have a physical hard copy of it.
Yeah, I agree. But I have gone over to the dark side. I do have ebook readers. I've got a Kindle, and then also got an old first gen iPad that I like to read on just because of the size of it. And
yeah.
I like the idea that I can carry 1,000 books with me wherever I go. But I like the tactile sensation of an analog book, if you will.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I hear you.
The smell, the leather, the way the pages sound, and things. That'll never be replaced.
Oh, there's nothing like the smell of like a brand new book. Like when you open it up and you just smell it. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And like even older books, like there's history in those in that writing. There's history in those books, and it's a little cheesy, but like you're looking at you're in a library or something, and you're going through an old book that's probably been looked at hundreds of times, and those are people that kind of wonder, like, oh, I wonder who checked this book out before me. I wonder who was doing research and thought this book was a good idea. And it kind of motivates you a little bit. And I certainly can see the need for I'm certainly into technology in my own right in certain aspects, but I just for some reason I can't put myself there as much as I can if I'm reading a physical book. So sometimes I'll mix it up. I'll have the physical book and I'll be typing notes out or whatever, whatever I need to do to put myself there. That's kind of what I'll do. And sometimes it's more difficult than others. It just depends on your mood that night. It's difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I remember in school, they would have the library card in the back of the book. And I would always do that. I would always go in there and look and see who had checked it out. And the place that I went to elementary school, my brother had gone there. He was 17 years older than I was, and my mother had actually attended that school like back in the 30s, and this was in the 60s. And there'd be times when I'd pull an older book out of the shelf and look, and there'd be my brother where he'd signed it out. And I even found a couple where my mom had signed them out, had her maiden name and everything. And that's just, again, it's like reaching back and touching that part of history and thinking, well, my mom read this 30 years ago, and here I am reading it now. Or my brother read this in the 50s, and now here I am, 20 years later reading it. It was kind of a magical thing. And then in college, the microfiche and the microfilm, that was the only way to get a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I do miss that. I had my own microfiche reader at one time that I got at a surplus auction.
Yeah,
but
wow.
It was kind of cost prohibitive to buy things on microfiche at that time. And I don't even know, do they still do that? I haven't been in that kind of research facility in a while. I'm assuming they still do archive things like that.
Oh yeah, they absolutely, yeah. In the National Archives, they have a lot of that, and a lot of the larger archives around the country, they do. Some of the older libraries, Los Angeles Public Library certainly does. As early as or as soon as last couple of years, that we were there, they have all that. They have a full section, and it's still very much a resource that people depend on, because it's some of this stuff you can't. Maybe you can't digitize everything, or maybe it doesn't work out as well as you need to. So back to microfilm you go, and it's dependable. It's really dependable, and it's there, and it does something to you when you're researching in that manner. Internet is wonderful. Obviously, you can do what we do, and you can utilize the internet almost purely. But if you want to sort of take it to the next level, I think if you're really getting into it, it really does do something different, to your mindset and your psyche. When you're looking at, old material that way, it just kind of like, I don't know, things materialize better for you. It just clears your mind. At least it does for me. So I will continue to go back to that well as much as I'm able to, certainly under the conditions we're in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, there's something magical about a book. There always has been for me. I was just the type that always had my nose in a book. My mom would often chide me and say that the house could burn down around you and you wouldn't even know it if you're reading a book.
Yeah.
Or if it was raining or snowing, I would want to go outside and mess around in it. But on a sunny day, I'd be sitting inside reading, and she'd be like, "It's sunny, go outside." I just take my book and go outside and sit under a tree and read. So it's always had a love for books, and that was fostered by my parents, especially my father. He read to me when I was small, and just started that love of reading for me. And I was allowed to read at the dinner table and things like that, stuff that a lot of kids would have gotten in trouble for. I was allowed to do it just because they liked the fact that I was reading.
Yeah. Yeah. It's reading was a big part of my life as a kid. And I think, I think people that are probably in the chat, they'll agree. It's, reading is still a big deal. It puts you, in a certain place. And, I feel like, we only live. There's an old quote. I forget someone in the chat will probably know, but I remember reading a quote, years ago. It's like, hey, everybody has one lifetime, but readers have like a million lifetimes because they're always putting themselves in different stories and different just different adventures. And I think like whether you're reading fictional, whether you're reading historical, whether you're going back in time, forward in time, sci-fi, whatever your forte is, whatever you like, I feel like that is it's one of the best parts of research is just kind of sitting back and reading. And sometimes when I take notes and when I'm kind of going through books and things, I'll be looking too intensely. I'll be going too closely. But sometimes when I just read a book for research purposes or something, something will click that just wouldn't normally click when it comes to you're sitting there trying to analyze every word on the page or trying to analyze what the writer is trying to say or, what they're talking about in a historical context or whatever the case is. So I feel like if you're reading just casually, sometimes you pick up the most important things then. And it's something I've always done. It's something I always will do. I've got a nice little size library here and all the cases that we cover. And I go back to them frequently, even when we're, covering something totally different. I might go back to something because some of these cases might link in certain aspects, and they might carry the same types of evidence or whatever the case is. So I might go back and see how a writer analyzed something in particular or whatever the case is. So it's, you always get something out of it no matter what you're doing, whether it's business or pleasure.
And like you said, reading things twice, because no matter how thoroughly I read something, I can go back and read it again and find things that I've missed or that I maybe see in a different light, or I've heard something between the last time I read it and the next time.
Yeah.
And it makes more sense or poses another question. And I love those little surprises like that you get the little Easter eggs when you go back through a book. Like, I missed that the first time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Same thing with movies, right? Like how many times have we watched a movie that you've seen 1,000 times and you'll go back and, my wife, there's a TV show. Well, I'm sure everybody on here knows the show Married with Children. I watched that growing up and I was watching it the other night and my wife pointed something out about one of the scenes that I had seen that scene probably over 100 times and I never noticed it. And it's like it's same thing with books. You'll get something out of it every time you go back, especially if you take a break and you read it, a year later or 2 years later, and you have like retrospective with what you read based off of something maybe you might have done. You look at it differently. You pick out different things, jump out at you. And, so yeah, it's always, you always get something out of it. And I think, speaking of reading and speaking of writing, I think Drew Beeson just entered the chat, and that guy, I will just say that you may or may not hear him on this season of Vanished.
Okay.
Drew Beeson is a great guy, and I've had some really great conversations with him. And shout out to Drew, man. It's good to see you in the chat, man.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, he just commented that it was great stuff, and I thanked him for it, but didn't know you guys were acquainted, so good deal. Well, now I put the slide up there with what you've got planned for season 2. What about beyond season 2? Anything, any little nuggets, any maybe tiny clues, or are you going to keep it a mystery?
Well, there's always cases that we want to cover. I mean, why don't people, hey, drop something in the chat if you want us to cover something in particular. If it fits our MO and it fits our format, we'd love to do it. We're certainly based historically, so we try to steer away from true crime. Yes, I know Jack the Ripper is sort of like a true crime origin story. It goes way back, but Jack the Ripper sort of fits our MO a little bit better. But I think you will see there might be certain true crime cases that carry something historically important, that carry mystery to it, that we might cover. I think one of the cases I've always wanted to cover, and of course we'll kind of figure out what the caseload is going to be for a potential season 3. But one of the cases I've always wanted to cover is the Zodiac. I think that's Zodiac. You can tie Zodiac to Jack the Ripper in certain little loose threads. If you're familiar with Jack the Ripper case, about certain aspects of what he did with the police and the Dear Boss letter and all that stuff. And you look at something like the Zodiac, which is a much more modern day serial killer that had the Zodiac letters and called into TV stations and sort of taunted the police and the media and things. So there's little threads here and there, and we don't know obviously whatever happened to Zodiac. There's speculation, there's rumor and innuendo, and there's people that believe they know who he was. So Zodiac might be one that we do, in keeping with maybe the one true crime case per season thing we're going to do here. I'll have to talk with Jen about it, but she's got some favorites we'll talk about probably, and we'll see. There's so many. There's so much historical mystery out there that it's difficult to pick out kind of what we're going to do. So you never know.
Yeah, I noticed in the cutout there that you have for the Vanished logo, I saw the Zodiac in the E there, and there's a couple of others I recognize in there, but of course Booth and D.B. Cooper and Earhart, and I see George Washington in there. I think it was one of those Francis Bacon. Is that
you got
on your radar?
You got Ichabod Crane, which for people who are interested in Sleepy Hollow, we did a really fun. So last Halloween, I'm sorry, not this past Halloween, but the one before last, we did a really fun 2-part series called Vanished Sleepy Hollow, and we had a lot of fun with it. It departed sort of the norm for what we do. We kept the trial by jury aspect of it, but we sort of continued the fictional aspects of the story, and we I won't give it away too much, but it's centered around Katrina Van Tassel, and it's sort of centered around this diary that Katrina had written where she had discovered that Brom Bones potentially actually murdered Ichabod Crane, and the whole Headless Horseman thing was kind of made up.
That sounds great.
We had some fun with that, and we had Jim Harold on, and Forrest Burgess, and some other people, Javier Leyva from Pretend, and some other folks that just kind of joined in and had some fun with us, and we created this really fun piece. So we did a 2-part Vanished Sleepy Hollow, and I know a couple of folks have asked her if we just do people. Well, I would say that there are aspects of things that we want. I would love to do an episode potentially on Noah's Ark. I would love to do an episode on the Spear of Destiny. That's one of my favorite stories, and those are obviously objects. And
the Holy Grail, or in the article in Podcast Magazine, it mentioned the Bermuda Triangle. So
Bermuda Triangle even has very thin, loose ties to Earhart. Way back when they were saying that Earhart, she disappeared as a result of the Bermuda Triangle, and there's little thin threads that you can link from story to story here, in certain aspects, some little things that they have in common. So we'll see where we sort of know where we're walking for season 2, and we have that caseload laid out. We'll see sort of what happens potentially for a season 3, and that's kind of it's kind of our forte. It's where we're at, and we enjoy the hell out of it. It's a lot of fun, and we're excited to take these all into the courtroom and have our listeners be our jury. That's that's the funnest aspect of it. We try to set it apart that way, and try to get our listeners to interact and sort of hear our presentations of these people's testimonies and their evidence and their all that stuff. And
the way that it's recreated in that format kind of puts me in mind. There was an old show when I was a kid called You Are There.
Yeah.
And where they would put on historical things and do it like a dramatic thing, like you were actually experiencing it or you were watching it happen. And it's kind of the same thing, but in a courtroom setting, which I think that's just brilliant.
Yeah. The courtroom adds a lot of drama to it, and I credit Jen for breathing life into that crazy idea I had. I remember talking to her initially and saying, hey, like, is this even doable? Like, where to make it sound legit and to make it, as along the legal lines as possible. Is it doable? And she was able to breathe life into that idea. And, I think we make a good team, and I think it's a lot of fun. We always, we come together and do these shows, and our investigations are independent of each other, which is also very interesting. So typically, she'll go off and do her side of the deal, and I'll do my side of the deal, and we'll typically just come together for the beginning, and then people hear us in court, quote unquote, in air quotes. They hear us in court kind of arguing against each other and arguing the cases against each other. I'm trying to push a specific theory or idea, and she's kind of doing what she does, and she pokes holes in it and kind of explains why that might not make sense. And we let our jury listen to it, and we come back together on our epilogue, and we kind of talk about it. We talk about what we learned in that case and what was fascinating about it, and what questions, if any, we still have. And we move on after that, move on to the next one. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and like I said, you can tell the guys have a passion for it. It's something that you're obsessed with in a good way.
Yeah, I think so.
Looking forward to getting caught up on the Ripper there, and then seeing where you go with season 2 and beyond.
Yeah.
Well,
it's going to be fun.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping it up here. Do you have any parting words or anything that you'd like to say to the audience, or anything? Yeah,
I mean, just check out the show. We love feedback. We just launched a merch store. So for people who are on this that want to get Vanished shirts and stuff that are from our group, we have a Facebook group. We would love to have you guys come on into our Facebook group. Just look up Vanished, Vanished podcast on Facebook, and we'll come up. Join the group. Get involved in the conversation. We love talking, with everybody. I think you'll see people, not only us as the host in the chat, and then everything, you'll see the guests that we have on the show in the chat. It's really, a lot of fun. You can find us on every major podcast platform. You can hit us at vanishedshow.com. We're there. And if you guys have a case that you think we should cover, I know people have dropped a couple of them in the chat. Send us an email, at vanishedshow@gmail. Send us an email, and I'm happy to check out whatever you guys have, and I can bring it to Jen's attention. We can discuss it, and maybe we can cover it. Maybe even if it's a one-off episode or whatever. But I think it's a lot of fun what we do, and I appreciate you having me on, and this was a real honor, man.
It's been a pleasure. It's fascinating. I love the show, and I'm anxious to see where you go with it. All right. Well, again, thank you on behalf of all of us here, folks. Before we let Chris go here, just want to let you know that I've got a show coming up tonight on KPNL. It's on the web at kpnl-db.com and on the app, which is available for Apple and iPhones, called The Dead of Night. And it's a talk show format, usually just me talking. That'll be on tonight at midnight Pacific. And then tomorrow night at 9 p.m., I've got a music show on KPNL called Ritual Radio. The little darker things going on over there. I'd like to invite you to join for that. I'll put links in the description here. And also, don't forget about the podcast that Jim and Jade and I are doing. Second episode came out today. It's put it up on the screen there for you. Talking about urban legends, strange urban legends that we believed as kids. So we had a lot of fun doing that one. So find us. We're on all the major podcasts. We're also here on YouTube, your favorite podcatcher. All of Apple, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean. I'll put a link in the chat there for the YouTube version. But again, Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Again, with short notice, just I don't remember, saw something on Facebook that you'd posted and sent you a friend request, and you immediately messaged me back, and that was like 3 days ago. So, and here we are. I love the way things like that can happen fast. I've got a guest coming up next Friday. Same thing. I saw a post that she'd done. I messaged her, commented on it. She friended me, messaged back and forth. Now she's going to be on the show next week. So I love my job. I love having people on that I admire, and I certainly admire you guys and what you were doing, and our compliments to you and Jennifer Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. What an honor. Thank you so much for allowing me on the show, and it's been great, and I appreciate the chat. It's been fun to watch you guys chat back and forth, and kind of everything you're talking about, and it's been a real honor. So thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. We'll have you back again sometime. And again, we look forward to seeing where you go. All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Campfire Stories. Don't know how many stories we actually told tonight, but gave you some information where you can go listen to a podcast that's got all kinds of stories on it. But check it out, the Vanished podcast. All right. Again, thanks everybody for showing up. Thank you, Royds, for the super chat. Appreciated that. Every penny goes back into the channel. John Sergei, thank you as well, sir. Appreciate that. Okay, you can again join me tonight on KPNL and tomorrow night. And otherwise, I'll see you later in the week. We've got some videos coming up. Got another Listener Stories episode coming out in the next couple of days, and some other fun surprises. So stay tuned. Everybody have a good evening, good morning, good day, good night, whatever it is, wherever you are. I'm Steve Stockton. I love every one of you. I'm out of here. Goodbye, folks.